Joining our next CLE series. This is the third installment of what's been a great series so far. My name is Chris Burrell, and I am the president of the Magic City Bar. It brings me great pleasure to be able to welcome you all here today. Last week, we had some more serious topics. We did one on money and we did one on voting, but this is no less important. Today, we're going to be talking about women in sports working to achieve parity. So again, thank you for being here. It's going to be a great CLE. I'm really interested to just sit back and listen to what the presenters have. So with that, I'll get out of the way and I'll turn it over to Andrew Nix, president of the Birmingham Bar, to bring you his greetings. Again, thank you all for being here. We look forward to a great CLE.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I agree with Chris. We've had an excellent now third part of our three-part series. Looking forward to hearing these awesome panelists today. I want to thank Chris and the Magic City Bar for co-sponsoring this three-part series with us as we celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment. Exciting time, and hope that there will be a continued celebration of this as we move forward. Want to go ahead and introduce Rebecca Beers, who will be our moderator for today's panel. We have an awesome panel and a really interesting topic, so we appreciate you all being here with us today. Rebecca is a good friend of mine and a partner at Rumberger Kirk, who focuses in the areas of securities litigation and commercial litigation. She represents broker-dealers and registered investment advisors in state and federal courts and in FINRA arbitrations in a variety of disputes. Rebecca is very involved in both the legal community, serving on many state bar and local bar committees, as well as the nonprofit community, serving on several boards and volunteering in many, many charitable events. So Rebecca, I know you'll be an awesome moderator today, and I will turn it over to you to get started. Thanks again for being here, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew, for that very kind introduction. And I am very honored and humbled to be the moderator for today's panel. I feel like many women in the South are big sports fans and are excited to hear from our panelists today. We have three outstanding panelists, the first of whom is Terri Williams-Flournoy, or Coach Flo. She is in her 9th season as the Auburn women's basketball head coach. She was hired on April 2nd of 2012, and she is the 6th head coach in the women's program history at Auburn. The 2019-2020 season was her 28th year overall in coaching, her 16th year as a head coach, along with 12 years as an assistant. In 8 seasons, Coach Flo has a record of 135 and 119 as Auburn's head coach, and a 278, 223 mark in 16 overall seasons as a head coach. She is known for her full court pressure defense, and Coach Flo's Auburn teams have averaged forcing more than 20 turnovers a game in her tenure, consistently among the SEC and national leaders in numerous defensive categories. Our second panelist is Dr. Janice Hilliard, founder of Hilliard Solutions. She's an accomplished and innovative and highly respected industry expert in the field of athlete education, development, and transition. She's a nationally recognized consultant, professional development trainer, workshop presenter, speaker, and resource for educators, athletic directors, sports officials, athletes, coaches, parents, and community leaders. Before forming Hilliard Solutions, where she was employed for 15 years at the NBA as a vice president, a senior director, and director of player development, where she led a continuing education and life skills program for NBA and development league players. Dr. Hilliard is the founder and host of the Women and Athlete Development Symposium and Networking event, designed to help women enter and advance in the field of athlete development, and as an adjunct professor at Michigan State University and Georgetown University. Finally, our third panelist is Michelle Clemon. She is the founder of Clemon Consulting Group. She's an experienced employment attorney and consultant with a background in human resource management. She holds a master's in sports management from the University of Florida, where her research interests included the intersection of elite athletes and social responsibility, and the underrepresentation of minority football coaches at the intercollegiate and professional levels. She is a consultant in the areas of human resources and sports. On the sports side, she is a PADS, P-A-A-D-S, certified athlete development specialist, and she focuses on preparing collegiate and professional athletes for their lives after sports by providing training and counseling on a number of topics, including career planning and transitions, professionalism, financial literacy, and emotional health and well-being. So as you can see, we have three really outstanding panelists today who I am so excited to hear from. So we're just going to start with just some background. I've obviously given their short bios, but I'd love to have our three speakers today kind of just discuss their background and experience as a woman in the world of sports. So Dr. Hilliard, you want to go first?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about being here today and being a part of this panel. You know, I usually start out talking about where I grew up, because I grew up in a small town in Central Texas outside of Waco. And I grew up at a time when there was a lot of racial change and things that are going on that we're experiencing today. But coming from a very small town taught me a lot of things that I was able to incorporate along my career pathway in sports. So I always start there. I attended the University of Houston on a basketball scholarship. Actually, it was a product of Title IX, and had the opportunity to play at U of H and then to go on to pursue a sports career. Was a high school teacher, coach, and counselor in Texas before moving on to Michigan, where I spent a majority of my time getting my master's degree and also my PhD, and had an opportunity to work in the public schools there, and also just stay involved in the sports realm. Ultimately, my segue from secondary education into higher education athletics administration was actually through the NCAA. I was an NCAA intern, where there I realized that the intersection between education and counseling, which was in my background in sports, there was actually a career that I could pursue as a former student athlete, and then had the opportunity to go on to the University of North Carolina the first time as an academic advisor, where I had the opportunity to work with student athletes, learn a little bit more about the business of sports and higher education as well. Then from there, I had the opportunity to come back home here to the University of Houston and to work in student athlete development here for a period of time before returning to Michigan State to finish my PhD, then back to North Carolina, working with student athletes before the opportunity to go to the NBA, which was a huge career shift for me. David Stern hired me in 2001 from the University of North Carolina to develop the model player programs for the then D League, which is now everybody knows is the G League. So the opportunity to combine my background in higher education and athletics, my secondary school experience, to create this model at the NBA really put me on a trajectory to understand the business of sports. And my work there at the NBA for 15 years, as you mentioned, was in the area of continuing education, staff development, also working with the extended families of the athletes and players and educational institutions, really just to put together a support structure for the athletes on all 30 teams. In addition to that, my work continued in staff development, working with staff at the league and the team level to help them to help the athletes. For the past 3 years, I've been back in Houston, where I started Hilliard Solutions, and the next quarter of my career, I've been fortunate and blessed to be able to do the same kinds of work here in Houston. And so through our support services here, we offer career services, consulting, and also curriculum development to educational institutions at all levels. So excited to be here, share my experience and knowledge, and looking forward to getting some questions from our audience.
Absolutely, and that's something I failed to mention earlier. So folks who are here as attendees, if you have questions for any of our panelists, you can enter it in the Q&A or the chat function, and I will do my very best to collect those and ask those as we go over some of the topics that we've set out. But excusing that interruption, Coach Flo, if you want to handle the same question that Dr. Hilliard did, just talk about a little bit about your background beyond kind of your bio that I mentioned, and talk about your experience as a woman in sports.
Well, it's hard after going after Dr. Hilliard. I feel like, hey, I'm just a coach. I'm just a coach. Okay. No, it's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to be on a panel with such distinguished women. Yeah, it's funny when I say I'm just a coach, because so much goes into that, and even how I even got into it, which is funny because I never wanted to be a coach. I graduated from Penn State University, had a master, my degree was in business management. So I always knew I would be sitting behind a desk telling people what to do. I just didn't know my desk consisted of a whistle and on a court, but I'm still telling people what to do. And so I just happened to, it's almost like you really never know where you're going to fall into until it actually happened. And now here I am 16, 12, 28 years later in the profession of a Division I college basketball coach. I think one of the things that I like to brag about the most is that it's definitely not my wins, because I don't have as many wins as I would like, but every player that has played for me and stayed here for 4 years have graduated. And that's usually a statistic that people usually don't share. And that's really one of the main reasons why they get a scholarship. It's not only to just play basketball, but it's also to get their degree. And so I feel like I'm not just their coach, so I help them along the way, to be more than just a basketball player. Being a coach, I've been a coach for so long, I really don't know what else I would do once I stop coaching, maybe coach some other people. But it's been great being a coach. I'm from Hampton, Virginia, so coming here to the South has been a little different, but I've been here for 9 years, so obviously the adjustment has been made. But it's wonderful, when we speak of, coaching, and the why we do it, we definitely do it for our student athletes. And they're the most important people in the whole game of everything that we do. So I've enjoyed being a coach and really appreciate being on this panel.
Well, thank you, Coach Flo. And last but not least, our third panelist is Michelle Clemon. So, Michelle, can you tell everybody a little bit about how you got involved in sports and your experience, at least on the business side as a woman in sports?
Absolutely, and having to come behind Dr. Hilliard and Coach Flo is, I'll try to do it, but we'll see how it goes. So yeah, I'm fairly new to the sports world, the sports industry. I'm an attorney. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I got my undergraduate degree in history from Yale, and then my law degree from Columbia. Came back home after I graduated, practiced at Maynard Cooper & Gill for a number of years, and after that went into a series of executive management positions with local for-profit and nonprofit organizations. I would say it was somewhere around 2012 or 2013 that I began to realize, and I've been cultivated a lifelong interest in sports. But it was somewhere around 12 or 13 where the cogs started spinning around. You have enough of an interest in this that it seems more than just recreational. And my mind began to explore what my background in law and HR in particular, what applying that skill set to the sports world might look like and what might be my entry points. And I will admit it was challenging being someone who hadn't played at the collegiate level and so didn't have that background, who as an attorney didn't get experience, as an employment lawyer, didn't get experience with areas germane to sports law, particularly in like Title IX, for example. So being without experience, having a background in law, but without direct sports experience was a challenge. And despite several efforts to get access, I was unsuccessful. And that's when I came up with the notion of, well, if you can't get the credential through experience, perhaps going the academic route is the way. That's an opportunity to get the academic background as well as to cultivate relationship with faculty and staff at these universities, at the university that you might attend. And so that's what ultimately led me to getting the Master of Science in Sport Management from the University of Florida. And it was there that I first learned about athlete development as a discipline in practice. As you mentioned, Rebecca, in the introduction, I am an athlete development specialist, and that's a certification that comes through PATS, the Professional Association of Athlete Development Specialists. It's a fairly new discipline, but fundamentally it's about preparing athletes for the day that they're no longer athletes. And all the topics and areas related to that support that effort. So it's career planning, it's career transitioning, it's mental health, it's fiscal literacy, it's media relations, it's the confluence of all those things. And my background being in HR lends itself to the career planning transitioning component of that. So I started the consultancy initially just doing garden variety HR work, but once I got the degree, I merged the sports piece into that. But I will say that as a woman, I did find myself having to create a way and a road and a path for myself where it wasn't being the road wasn't being opened up to me, if you will. And I'm really excited about being on this panel.
Well, I'm excited for doing my best to drive the conversation. And one of the things that Dr. Hilliard, you and Michelle mentioned was Title IX. Dr. Hilliard, I know you said that you were a product of Title IX as an athlete. Can y'all just talk a little bit about your knowledge and experience, how effective, in your opinion, Title IX has been for collegiate athletes, and whether you think Title IX has fed into the development of women's sports at the professional level? So anybody want to take that topic first?
Sure, I'll kick it off and then bring the lawyers behind me and then the practical folks who really know this, Coach Terri. I teach a women leadership in sports course at Michigan State each fall that I mentioned earlier. And we start out talking about women and girls' participation in sports as sort of the foundation for their involvement in this industry. And we talk a lot about Title IX and the question that you posed, Rebecca, in that what impact has Title IX really had on sports? And so there's sort of three thoughts that I have about that. And the first one is that there's no question that the numbers of girls and women who are participating in sports has increased because of those opportunities. But probably most importantly is whether or not that participation has transitioned into positions of leadership for women. And that, I think, is the biggest issue, because even within college athletics, you have a number of sports that girls participate in, but we know that for women of color in particular, that is in the sport of basketball and track and field is what the data shows. So when you look at basketball, you know that there is a professional league with the WNBA. You look at track and field and those that make it to that level. So when you talk about opportunity and numbers of participation, you also have to look at what is being offered in terms of the numbers of sports and who is participating in those sports, and how do you continue still to increase that pipeline. I think the Women's Sports Foundation does tremendous research in following girls' participation in sports. The NCAA has done a lot of work in terms of tracking participation, but in that transition, as I noticed, to levels of leadership is, I think, where we're still seeing sort of the challenge. And that's an area that I would like to see change. But again, that's related to access, participation, actually growth to a position of leadership.
Thank you. Michelle, Coach Flood, y'all have any thoughts and observations on Title IX, and particularly how it relates to a transition from participation to leadership, and also participation in professional sports?
I only have a quick observation. My level of interaction with Title IX as a lawyer is non-existent, so I wouldn't dare speak from that perspective. I can piggyback off of what Dr. Hilliard has observed with regard to, no doubt the numbers have increased, but what next? And to the extent that there's a what next, that question hasn't been answered. It's kind of akin to Title VII granting, eliminating discrimination, but Title VII hasn't necessarily resulted in increased access to leadership. And so I think both those laws have kind of encountered the same challenges. Access is one thing, elevation is another. And so that is that is a challenge that's not just particular to Title IX, but that's my observation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the both of them. This is going to sound bad the way I'm going to put it, but it's almost like we've been given our cake, but you're not going to have the icing to go with it. Yeah. So from our perspective, being in it, we have the opportunity. We get the scholarships. We get the shoes, the gear, but it seems like we're always shorthanded, you know, and being in it, and then trying to explain that to my players when they come to me and say, well, men's basketball gets so-and-so, or football gets so-and-so. It's hard for me to say, you know, how do I give that answer? You know, can I say, well, you know, hey, Title IX has given us just enough, okay, to put you there, and you got it, what you asked for. Now, I don't know how much more you can have. And it's helped us, you know, please don't get me wrong. It has absolutely helped us. It's opened doors, but I promise you that door can be open a lot wider, okay? Right now, it's just a little cracked. Okay, that door can be open extremely wide because the opportunities are there in the leadership positions. You know, you look at how many athletic directors do we have, you know, take away the senior women administrators, we have lots of those, but how many actually get to be athletic directors? And that's a field that's very limited for us, you know. So Title IX has absolutely helped. But when I have players that come and ask me why we don't have what someone else have, and we're playing the same exact sport and we're working just as hard, it's very hard to answer that question.
Coach Lowe, can you speak a little bit to, you know, we've talked about Title IX increasing the numbers of women participating in sports, but I would encourage everyone to look at the CLE materials that have been provided. I was looking at, there are several papers, research papers included about women in leadership positions in sports. And one of those papers was talking about the disparity in women in coaching in women's sports, that women's sports, even women's, you know, women's sports that are women's college basketball, for example, I think I read like 57% of coaches in women's college basketball are men.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience as a coach and how the kind of landscape for women to move from a playing position to a coaching position, and whether that you've seen any changes in that, you know, through your career as both a player and now as a coach as well?
Absolutely. Our path has definitely been a little more challenging. It's almost like we have to knock the wall down where other people can just jump over the wall to be able to get the opportunity. And it's just not as fair that how many women are coaching men. You know, I mean, if men can coach women, women can coach men, you know.
Absolutely.
But we're not given that opportunity. But now it's slowly changing. You're seeing more of our women coaches in the NBA. You're seeing more of our women coaches coaching, you know, high school, boys high school. So is it getting better? It is. Is there a lot of room to grow? Of course it is. And that's one of the things that we just have to continue to fight on. You know, when a job opens up, it can't just be, you know, we had a certain number of women that we interviewed, you know. It's got to be that we actually got the job. And I'm not saying that men cannot coach women, because my brother's an AAU coach, you know, and I hire male coaches on my staff. So it's not that they cannot coach women. It's just that I almost feel like it's our game. It's almost like we should have the opportunity to do it first. Especially a lot of players right now, they want to get into coaching, and it's extremely hard for them to get into coaching. And we got to find a way to make it easier for them to do what they love to do. I think they bring an unbelievable value and experience to that student athlete.
Dr. Hilliard, do you have any, as a former, on the administrative side of a professional organization, how did you see, I know that now there are, I think there are at least a couple of on-court women coaches in the NBA. Can you talk a little about how you saw that evolve?
Sure. Clearly, everything starts with leadership, right? So when, I brag about the WNBA, because that's who we see out there when we talk about those positions of folks who are in front office positions, who are coaches in the WNBA. They came from that sport, right? And so because there's obviously a leadership at the top levels, David Stern, when he was alive, obviously, and Adam Silver, and all the other folks, who put a priority on giving the access to women and coaches out there as well, like Coach Pop and others that provide that opportunity, and even at the NFL in some situations. So I think, for me, the challenge continues to be getting more women in administrative and leadership positions at the college level as well as at the professional level. And I know that everybody sees the report that Dr. Lapchick does every year out of the Institute for Study of Diversity and Ethics out of UCF. I believe he just released baseball, I think today, and released the WNBA a couple of months ago. If we look at those numbers, right, in terms, we know that we still have a long way to go. So I think increasing the pipeline, having more women administrators, athletics directors, that number is extremely low still in college athletics, right? How many ADs, are there? Carla Williams at UVA, and, there's a handful of them around the country, but when you have more women in those leadership roles, then they may be more inclined to look at more women, perhaps. And that in fact is the challenge, and I think also the opportunity.
Absolutely. Michelle, do you have any thoughts? I don't want to pass you over. Do you have any thoughts on the topic?
I don't feel passed over at all. I'll completely refer to what Coach and Dr. Hilliard have said.
Well, one thing I know that Coach Flo mentioned, and something that we were talking about before we went live with everyone, was gender equity and pay, facilities, promotional roles between men's and women's sports. And I think that's been highlighted most by the lawsuit that was filed by the U.S. women's national team, the soccer team. And something that I was curious about and interested in was, there are some sports, particularly in the U.S., where women have excelled, in international competitive play far more than men have. If you think about individual, at least in recent years, women's tennis with the Williams sisters and a young up and coming women's tennis players, or the U.S. women's national team compared to the men's national team. If y'all could just talk your thoughts about, I know, and Coach Flo, you did touch on this a bit, about disparity in pay in professional sports, and also access to facilities, athletic training, support, promotion, and whether you have seen success equal more equity within, like competitive success result in more equity between the genders in sports, and whether kind of your thoughts on that, and any thoughts that you may have when that lawsuit or similar topics. So I know Michelle had some thoughts on this earlier, so.
Yes, we were talking before the webinar started about the lawsuit that the National Women's Soccer Team has filed against the Soccer Federation. I forget the exact name of it, of the organizing organization. But they have an Equal Pay Act claim that had 3 prongs to it, or maybe arguably 2. One was around pay, and the other was around kind of lack of access to similar resources with regard to travel accommodations and medical support. The judge has recently tossed out the pay claim and has left the travel accommodation and medical support piece, which is really interesting to me. The basis of his decision was that there's a non-discriminatory reason for the disparity in pay. The women's team and the men's team have unions that respectively negotiate their collective bargaining agreements. And the men's team negotiated their CBA in such a way that it's more incentive loaded and less base salary loaded. And the opposite is true for what the women did with their CBA. It is more salary loaded and less incentive loaded. And basically the judge decided that that was the fact that there was the disparity in pay came down to how the difference in how the CBAs were negotiated, not some discriminatory motive, which is interesting to me because women historically in sport have to take what they can get from a pay standpoint. If you look at their colleagues over in the WNBA, they get paid, I think the high end of the salary in the WNBA is like $250,000 a year compared to Steph Curry, who maybe got 40 million last year. So if you take that and compare and apply that to the dynamic that may be going on with the respective soccer teams, you might understand a scenario where women are more inclined to take the base salary as the lead, because if they're not getting the support they need from a travel accommodation or medical support standpoint, what's the likelihood that they're going to hit those incentives? So it's kind of like what's leading what there. So I'll be interesting to see once the parts of the case that remain come back online. I'll be interested in seeing what becomes of that. The ruling was admittedly disappointing. I am on the, if we look at other sports, tennis in particular, what Venus Williams did around her campaign seeking pay equity for Wimbledon was tremendous. It took years of effort and innovation and lobbying to make that happen. But it was the one remaining Grand Slam that wasn't equally paying its participants and winners. And Venus fought for that, and thank God for voices like Venus. But that work is hard and long and arduous, and there's still so much to be done around it. I'll be quiet now.
No, thank you. Coach Flo, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, and like I said, I hit on it before. It's almost very small when you look at it from a college athletic part of it, because we travel almost the same. Our gear and our facilities, because we share facilities, everything is just about fair, but it's always a little bit of area that's there, and you have to really be in it to actually see it. Even from a pay perspective, from us as female head coaches, I don't even make even close to what a male coach coaching a Division I Power 5 basketball program. I'm not even close to what my male counterpart is making. And it's frustrating at times, because it's like, as a woman, I'm almost doing a little bit more, okay? Because the household back home, it does not stop. So even though I'm the CEO at my job, I'm the COO at my house. and it's almost like I should get an extra pay for, having to do a little bit, and I go up my male coaches, they say, well, we do the same. I said, what size shoes do your son wear? What size dress does your daughter wear? Yeah. Do you know their favorite food? Like, no, you don't do the same, When we come in the house, we're hit with, hey mom, da. So it's hard to fight that battle, because then they go to us and they say, well, they get more fans at their game, so they're bringing in more money, than what the female sports are bringing in, so it's always a battle into why things aren't fair. and sometimes it just really doesn't make much sense to it, because when you're doing the exact same job, you're putting in the exact same hours, if not more, then who's to say one should get paid more than the other? The soccer player, she's working just as hard, if not harder, than the male player. So who's to say that, you know, one should be paid more than the other? And I'm gonna stop talking because I could really go on and on about pay. Okay, that's not fair. You know, even we'll get chartered flights, okay, but the men may get maybe just 2 more, okay, than us. You know, like I said, it's always just a little bit there that it's almost like to show you, yeah, we gave you this, but they're still just going to get just a little bit more. And that's very hard for me to completely understand. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hilliard and let her go. Mm-hmm.
Well, Coach Flo, you mentioned that, you know, and I feel like it's often the excuse given is in the difference in accommodations and pay is often like, well, you know, men's basketball sells more tickets. The men's basketball, like for Auburn, you could say, you know, the men's basketball team went to the Final Four. And I think a lot of times people use popularity or success, competitive success as a reason, as a differential in pay. And that was one thing that I found so interesting about the U.S. women's national team's lawsuit, is that they are, you know, leaps and bounds more successful than the men's team.
Yes.
Or, you know, there are certainly sports, I'm thinking of particularly like Olympic sports, where the women's side, at least as far as the U.S. is concerned, is far more successful on an international competitive level than the men's. And do we think that if you did take your team to the Final Four, do you think things would change? Like, that's what's fascinating to me, is that if the competitive success is viewed as a bar to equity and pay and facilities and support, once that is actually reached, do things equal out? And I would love to get all three of y'all's thoughts on that.
No. It doesn't.
Very short answer.
It does. And it's hard because to get the fans out to support us, take a Final Four team, okay? We're a very good team. We will never get the same amount of people in that facility as a men's team will, just because it's still that person out there that just doesn't believe that women's basketball is as good as men's basketball, because, you know, we don't have the excitement, we don't dunk, you know. It's just like it's always some excuse on why we're pushed back, and it's hard to really, you can't make anyone like your sport. You know, as I tell everyone, come watch us play. You know, go watch a women's game, go watch a women's soccer game, watch tennis, watch the women. They're very good, you know, and you're judgmental on something that you haven't even given enough time and attention to.
Dr. Hilliard?
Well, I have to jump in here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I switched over to defeat some of the noise here. I have to jump in before the lawyer speaks, and sort of be the devil's advocate, right? So a person that's lived in both worlds my entire career, in the academy, as well as in corporate America and in business, you know, the reality is that sports is a business, not only at the professional level, but also at the college level. And I used to not use that word business when I would talk to ADs and coaches, but with the introduction of name, image, and likeness, which we won't have time to talk about today, it is clearly now in America that college athletics is clearly a business, right? And all of the issues that come with how that thing is going to unfold. So that is first the reality part, and more so obviously at the professional level than at the college level. And that being driven by television, being driven by ticket sales, being driven by facilities, and all of those things is a reality. That said, the barriers that exist for women and girls in sports will never be broken down, and to address the money issue until we address those barriers. And I talked about leadership from the very beginning is where we start, but there are tons of other barriers that exist in terms of women. And one thing, Rebecca, I want to comment on, I think recently I actually read a study where someone has done some research on competitive excellence, Rebecca. I saw this recently, and I think it was with basketball. And they looked at the success of women basketball coaches versus male basketball coaches and found that it was comparable.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very exciting. I had not seen that study before. And perhaps ultimately then how we evaluate, how we determine success, how we frame what success looks like could impact then who we select then eventually to lead teams, to coach teams. And so that would cause for a different perspective in the way that we look at sports for women. But I'm very optimistic because sports being a reflection of society, what we see happening with women in society in general, the movement that we're talking about today, the recognition of women gaining the right to vote and how it changed America. I think we see women leading in America today, not only in sports. We look in government and politics. And so perhaps I'm optimistic that this change will change standards in the way that we think about what excellence is and the way that we think about the value that women bring from the society level also into sports. I think I'm hopeful, Coach, that we will get there.
Yeah, and Dr. Hilliard, it's funny that you mentioned that. I believe that study or a paper discussing that study is included in the CLE materials. So again, I would highly recommend people checking those materials out. A lot of very interesting research and papers. So that is fascinating. Michelle, do you have any thoughts on the topic? I know you do.
I do, but in the interest of time, I'm going to defer to what Coach and Dr. Hilliard have said.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So something that kind of leads in, and this is a question that we received from one of our participants, is, and I think this would go to all three of you, Coach Flo particularly, but all three of you, as a woman in sports, do you feel like you have equal footing in negotiating your salary as men do? And if not, what's the difference, and what can we do as women, as non at the sports arena, but also particularly in y'all's field, what can women do to do better to negotiate a salary that you believe is fair and appropriately compensating?
Yeah, Rebecca, I used to think that wins and losses would deviate your salary, either increase it or not. But that's not always the case. So many reasons come for, after a successful season, you think as a coach that, you should be given the opportunity to increase your salary or increase your years, which kind of increases your salary. But it's not always the case. But then you can go look at your male counterpart who has one better successful season, and all of a sudden they're getting 5 extra years, and you don't really know why. You just, it's like, Dr. Hilliard said, it's getting better, and she just gave me some hope. Okay, so I'm gonna keep hope alive. Okay, that it will get better, but it does not always come down to just having a successful season. I wish they would put other criterias in it. Your student athletes graduating, your retain, whatever it is, other requirements that would help you to increase your salary, because unfortunately it isn't always, sometimes they'll tell you, well, you did it one time, let's see if you can do it again. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Dr. Hilliard, do you have any thoughts on women, any sort of disparities in women being able to negotiate salaries in a male-dominated industry?
Well, I mean, clearly, there are disparities. Part of what we do at Hilliard Solutions is career coaching, right? And working with women. I've seen a lot of articles recently, in fact, on LinkedIn, that talk about owning your value. So one part of being a good negotiator is knowing your value. And I think we talk a lot to women about making sure you know what that value is, so that you are putting forth sort of your best foot aggressively or assertively when you are in negotiating situations. And often we see that women are not always as confident, and there's research to this in terms of negotiation. And in fact, no one ever taught us how to negotiate when we were growing up and going to college and getting all of these degrees. No one really taught us about money and working in these settings. And that may be the biggest thing that I learned working in corporate sports is being confident in yourself, in your abilities, but also learning those skills and techniques that have to do with negotiation. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're not going to be discriminated against or get that position that you know that you should, but very often we are not as confident as women and not really package ourselves and learn to market ourselves and be comfortable with that. And I'll give one example that you guys may have already heard out there, and that is research shows that, for example, when men apply for a position, they look at the job description and they go through all the items and they say, I can do all that. But when women, sometimes when we look at the job description, and we say, oh, I can do 9 of 12 of those things, and we won't apply. That's research has proven that. So one of the things that we have to do is continue to be diligent about pursuing what we know our value is, educating ourselves and really being a little bit more assertive and kind of pushing that door open continuously.
And if I could piggyback on that, I totally agree with what Dr. Hilliard has said with regard to the need for us to have more awareness of our value and worth and more assertive and more confidence. As was mentioned in my introduction, a part of the research I did as a graduate student was around the underrepresentation, particularly of Black college and professional male coaches. But some of the same analysis applies to women coaches. There's human capital and there's social capital. And in this space, I think from a negotiation standpoint, oftentimes we as women are reticent to leverage that social capital space. If that means inviting a group of folks, including some potential decision makers, to golf or whatever those activities we could do pre-COVID together. But identifying and being assertive and confident enough to take the lead in generating and cultivating the relationships with the folks that will ultimately be making those decisions is one strategy that I think warrants exploration and consideration. But confidence and worth and assertiveness are all important factors in negotiating.
And something, another question we received from a participant that kind of goes along to that, and this is directly directed to Coach Flo specifically, but I think all three of y'all could speak to this, is, with sports being such a male-dominated field, do women, you specifically, Coach Flo, or any of the three of y'all, feel a need to conform to kind of the male-dominated arena, to act maybe like in one way or another, more masculine, less feminine, to be to kind of change your personality to conform more to what kind of men expect of other men in the sports business world? Or is that, are you able to be yourself kind of? I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but that's.
Yeah, I completely understand. I'm going to add one thing to our last comment as well. There's an education part to it as well. A lot of times we go in and we assume that, the person that we're bargaining with actually is educated on the women's side of our sports. And that's not always true. And I went in, and I had to learn this. I went in with all the confidence in the world, and I assumed that my athletic director knew how hard it was in our conference, you know, or where everybody else was in our conference. And you can't assume that. So that there's an educational part that you have to go in there with as you're negotiating as well. I'm never going to fall in line with my males. First of all, my males can't be fancy like me, okay? And I don't think you ever change who you are, no matter what field that you're in. And I've sat at that table where I am the only, not just the only female, the only Black female. And so you stand there with confidence, and you hold your own, and you continue to just be who you are. I don't think you should ever change because of your environment. There's certain things you have to change, but you never change who you are deep inside. We did a workshop, and your profile is your profile. Where you go to first in your preference is who you are. And there are things that just cannot change. And I don't think you try to be, you know, bigger than them, you know, or try to speak louder than them just so that you can be heard. My mom used to tell me some of the quietest people are the ones that's whispering. I mean, some of the smartest people are the ones that's whispering. And so you don't have to just fall in line with our male counterparts. And definitely don't believe because it's their profession that you have to sit back and be something else.
Thank you.
I totally agree with Coach there. You know, having worked in both levels at the professional level, which was certainly more corporate, as well as the college level. I guess, first of all, again, always having lived in two worlds with athletes and then being a part of the management is that, and then being a PhD, a woman of color, and an athlete. And it's been interesting because I've seen what you asked, Rebecca. I've seen women more so at the corporate level who've sort of behaved in that stereotype masculine manner at very high levels. And that works for them, I guess. At the college level, perhaps is different. But for me, like Coach Flo said, I've always been who I am, and that has really been helpful to me, particularly when you're working directly with athletes at whatever level, because they want you to keep it real, you know. And a part of my pathway has been not only because of my educational background and my area of expertise, but the ability to relate to the athletes. And especially now that they have seized their power and they understand and are making demands in some cases regarding what they would like to see and who's in positions of leadership. I think it's important because they can see you for who you are, just like organizations can. And your value to an organization is who you are when they hire you and they bring you on board. And so staying true to yourself, I think it's just a must. And it certainly has been an asset for me my entire career.
And I'll piggyback on that quickly. I have been fortunate, not having been in the industry very long, if you will. I have been fortunate that at this point in my career, and with this kind of being a mid-career pivot for me, who I am at this point is what clients want. So me being my authentic self, I am the person in a meeting that's going to sit, not going to say much, sit. You may think I'm not engaged, I'm listening. And towards the end, I might say something that indicates, oh, not only was she listening, she was processing and synthesizing. And for a long time, I felt as though that wasn't valued because the real leaders always talking and always got ideas coming. And so I've gotten more comfortable being the person that cogitates over and then shares. And I'm fortunate to be in a space in which the folks I work with value that as well. I'm in the process of, I have a collaboration, Clemon Consulting has a collaboration with the University of Florida, where we're doing a series around athletes and activism. And the value I bring is my intellect and my perspective. And if I were to compromise that to make anybody comfortable, what I would bring to the table would be worthless. And so it's always important for me to stand in the truth of who I am and not kind of compromise that to make other people comfortable.
Thank you. And we have time. I think I'm going to ask one last question, but before I do that, I just want to make sure all of the attendees who are on the call, please look and take a look at your name. That's how we are crediting people with CLE credit. And if your name is just listed as a phone number or reception or mom's iPhone or just some initials, please send an email to Jennifer Bittner at the Birmingham Bar so we can make sure everybody who has been listening in on this very really awesome conversation gets credit for your CLE. So please do send an email to make sure if you're just have your first name listed or your initials that we're giving you credit. So before we close, I want to ask just one last question. I know this has been 2020 has been a very interesting year for everyone from a wide range of perspectives, but I think one thing that's really been at the forefront this past week has been the power of athletes to speak out on all types of social justice issues. Particularly, I know there have been the WNBA has done a lot on speaking out on social justice issues. I know that there is a professional women's tennis player who withdrew from a tournament to speak out on social justice issues. And so to the extent y'all have thoughts, we just would love to hear how women in sport particularly can use their platform to speak out on any number of social justice issues. Obviously, the U.S. Women's National Team are using their predicament to speak out on women's rights, women's equity, but also any number of racial equity issues. So to the extent y'all have thoughts, would love to hear it.
I have some thoughts and I'll try to share them quickly. I know we're wrapping up. Women have always been at the forefront of activism in this country and have been using their platforms in different ways. If you look back at, we could use another session to talk about Althea Gibson, but if you look at Billie Jean King and what she was doing in the 70s around women's equity in that space. If you look at the WNBA today, I mean, they are the front runners as far as, forget the NBA, the WNBA is where it's at as far as athletes and activism. And they were Kaepernicking and taking stands before Kaepernick. If you look at the Minnesota Lynx, what they were doing in the summer of 2016, the fact that WNBA has a broad range of issues that they've been targeting for years, not just the leagues, but the league itself, but the teams and the individual players. And so you have this tiered level of commitment, the players, the teams, and in coordination with the league and their union, like how they've masterfully brought that together. They are the model to me for how women athletes can use their platforms prospectively, use their platforms successfully and in a way that's supported by the organizations for which they work.
Thank you. Dr. Hilliard, Coach Flo?
I totally
I had to unmute myself. I had to unmute myself really quickly. Yes, to echo what Michelle said, obviously I'm a little bit biased because of having spent so much time at the NBA. However, that's very accurate. What I would say is I am excited about the future when it comes to not only activism and equity when it comes to women. I think this is the opportunity for us to really capitalize on cultivating women athletes in particular and creating these career pathways for them to be able to walk into these positions of leadership. This is an opportunity. We have many women like myself and others who are athletes who were not cultivated as athletes to be ready to coach, to be ready to be administrators, to be ready to be sports executives. And so I call on our educational institutions and our professional sports leagues to now create this platform so that they can now be educated about issues and be developed as leaders, particularly as women, to carry on this important work.
Thank you. Coach Flo, you get the last word.
No, it's awesome. And I think it's an unbelievable opportunity for my young athletes, for my student athletes, to see women who look just like them standing up and talking about what's right, watching the WNBA. And just like Michelle said, not just now, it's just becoming kind of vocal now, but they've been doing it for a very long time. It gives my student athletes an opportunity of like, oh, wow, like I do have a voice. I can use my voice. And I like that because it empowers them. And of course, I'm there to educate them to keep it, at a level where you have a voice, you're using your voice, but don't overuse your voice, and make sure that you're not just doing it because everybody else is doing it. We did an educational series on Black Lives Matter, the whole organization, because, they heard so many things from it. Well, let's once again, educating our young student athletes on it as well. We have a voting challenge going on right now. I'm actually down to 2. I got 2 more that we got to get registered, and so, it's good for them, because if all of this was not happening, would they actually be thinking about voting? Probably not, probably not. So as bad as some of this seems, it is such an opportunity to help our young kids grow and learn and be better people as well.
Well, thank you so much. Dr. Hilliard, Michelle, do y'all have any other closing thoughts that you want to give us before we sign off for the day?
No, thank you. It's just been such an honor to be on this panel with Dr. Hilliard and Coach Flo, and thanks to the Birmingham Bar Association and Magic City Bar Association for having me.
Echo that, Michelle, as well. This has been very exciting, and thank you guys for having us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It has been my great honor and pleasure to be able to talk to you 3 ladies for this past hour. And thank you so much for lending your time and your talents and your voice to us, and also to women in sports generally. And I look forward to seeing where the 3 of you continue to grow and excel and be leaders in your industry. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who called in. As a reminder, please do send in an email to Jennifer Bittner. It's jbittner@birminghambar.org. If you have called in and just have your first name or a phone number or something generic as your Zoom identifier, so we can make sure we get everyone the appropriate credit. Thank you so much to the Birmingham Bar and to the Magic City Bar Association for putting this together. It has really been a great experience for me, and hope everyone else has enjoyed it. And you'll be receiving an email with the ability to give a review of this program, which I really encourage you to fill out. That enables us to get credit for this program. So Jennifer, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great day, great rest of your week. Thank you to our panelists. This has been exceptional. A great way to cap off our celebration of the centennial of women's suffrage. So thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.